I remember the new CEO was like, what are all these old bikes doing around the warehouse? Like, what are these things? And I'm like, dude, this is like, you bring any industry partner into this office and they're going to freak out. We had over 300 historic bikes. And when he called it, what are all these old bikes doing everywhere? I was like, yeah, this isn't going to work. It didn't feel right? Like it wasn't a good transition for me. And I had to step away. I eventually got pushed out.
From Escape Collective, this is Overnight Success, the podcast about the entrepreneurs, the personalities, and the passionate people who make up the sport of cycling and the stories behind the icons they've built. The Pros Closet is the quintessential modern startup journey. What began as a mountain bike racer selling used cycling gear on eBay grew into the largest certified pre-owned bicycle marketplace in the United States. The company rode a wave of success with $90 million in funding that completely reshaped the used bike marketplace and had ambitious expansion plans. But like many pandemic-era success stories, the Pros Closet's trajectory was ultimately shaped by the perfect storm that followed. Cheap capital that fueled unrealistic growth, an assumption that the cycling boom would continue indefinitely, and the whiplash effect of supply chain chaos that rocked the entire bicycle industry. Their story captures both the soaring possibilities and sobering realities of building a business during one of the most volatile periods in cycling industry history. Nick Martin was the Pros Closet's early founder. Nick grew up in Wisconsin as a self-described chubby kid who was initially passionate about golf. He would ride his ill-fitting Schwinn 10 miles each way to the golf course, playing 27 holes before riding back home. Over several years, this routine not only improved his fitness, but also sparked an unexpected love for cycling that would eventually overshadow his golfing ambitions. During college in Wisconsin, he interned at Trek's nearby warehouse and later joined the regional racing team. After graduation, he loaded 9 bikes into his Volvo station wagon and moved to Grand Junction, Colorado, living in his teammates' front yard while pursuing his dream of professional mountain biking. He went on to race professionally for 7 or 8 years. Nick says that he had an early aptitude for business and numbers, spending his childhood evenings studying trading card pricing guides, and his grandmother, who played a significant role in his upbringing since his parents had him at a very young age, taught him about things like compound interest and real estate principles when he was only 9 years old. Interestingly, when he eventually started the Pros Closet, it was his first real job outside of his internship at Trek. This is Nick's story. Take me back to, I think a lot of people do know the story of the early days, but take me back to the, selling kit and parts and bikes out of that Volkswagen bus in Grand Junction. Tell me about those times. How did that all start?
Oh, it was the best. I didn't even have a computer at that time or a camera. So it was like starting. Yeah, it was, and it instilled like some things in me that are still really important to me today, which is like simplicity and buying used and seeing value in the things around us. And I still get rid of a thing a day, or try to get rid of a thing a day every day, and live as simply as possible. But when I was in the bus, you don't have a lot of space, and we were getting a ton of free stuff. Our sponsors, not a ton of stuff, but you'd get a lot of stuff. So when you live in a bus, it feels like a lot of stuff. You'd get about 2 or 3 bikes a year, and then a ton of clothing and parts here and there. And then at the end of the year, sponsors would change, your kits would change, and you'd have all this stuff. And I couldn't carry it with me because I had, a van and nothing else, and I couldn't want to pay for storage. And I was living off of $17 a week. I remember that because I'm a numbers guy, and that was my budget. I would eat pancakes and live off of my Power Bar sponsorship, and and just eat as simply as possible. And so I'd have to sell these things to make money. So I would start selling them on eBay. I would borrow Ross's computer. I would borrow my friend George's camera, take pictures of stuff. And then after our training rides, I would sell them on eBay. And then then Ross was like, "Can you start selling stuff for me?" And I started selling stuff for other people. And before I knew it, I was in the Grand Junction library, like with a tape gun, packaging and shipping stuff out of the library in line with a bunch of homeless people to use the computers there, right? Like, and I guess I was homeless too, so I was in my own company, but um, that's what I did every day after I rode was go and sell the things I didn't have, and then I would also look for cars when I would be riding. We go on these back roads. Ross was a car guy too, and we would look for old cars in the back of people's yards, and specifically Volkswagens because that's what I knew. Um, and I would knock at people's doors and buy these vans and then park them out on eBay. So I would, and so I started just finding stuff to flip when I didn't have anything else to sell. Um, and I eventually sold everything I owned except for, the bikes that I was using, my bus. And I've gone through different stages in my life and I've done that. I've sold everything I've owned, 2 or 3 times, again since then.
Yeah, wow. And you made a move down to Boulder at some point. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's a good question. Zach Vestal, he was my team manager and
Yeah,
mechanic.
I know Zach.
Do you know
Yeah,
Zach?
yeah, awesome
Awesome.
guy.
He's good, good people, and I wouldn't be in Boulder if it wasn't for Zach.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I was racing on the Trek team. Though my whole career I raced for Trek. Thankfully, it was a great relationship, um, and he was like, "Hey, if you want to take it to this next level, you know, Grand Junction's only going to get you so far because I was training with Ross, and then he went off to radiology school, so he didn't continue racing, and I was kind of training by myself and didn't have anybody else to push me, so I moved up to Boulder. Zach was nice enough to give me a room in his condo, and I helped him sell, all the stuff that he had extra as well, and in exchange for a room, and uh, then I could train with the best. And like Tyler Hamilton was one of my training partners, still a good friend, and just leveled up, right? You're a product of the people you surround yourself with, and I still it's a big part of how I try to live my life is surround yourself with people that inspire you and want to push you want to be pushed by. And by moving to Boulder, it allowed me to do that, and the business never would have succeeded if it wasn't for Boulder and the cycling community here, and just the network of people that I was able to tap into by moving up here.
Yeah, it's a very unique place, isn't it?
It is. It is. I love Grand Junction, though. The roads in Grand Junction, the trails in Grand Junction are some of the best. If you ever get a chance, the Colorado National Monument is still my favorite road ride of all time. And that like high altitude desert
Yeah.
vibe, which Boulder doesn't have, was great. And I still miss that. But I was very thankful for Boulder and still here today.
Tell me how you bumped into Pete Lopinto. From what I understand, he was an early, I'm not sure if he was an employee or a partner in the business. Tell me about your relationship with him, how that got started, his involvement in the early days.
Yeah, Pete is, he was my first employee, but he was one of my first clients as well. So when I moved to Boulder, he was racing for the Sierra Nevada team. And I would start training. I was training on the road a lot in the wintertime. I never was really good at racing. I was really good at training. And I would spend a lot of time with the road guys. And Pete is, do you know Pete well?
Not very well, but we've crossed paths through industry stuff before and that, yeah.
He's a great people person and a great connector. And he, like, I knew the mountain bike scene and he knew all the road guys. So like I was, I had started the business at that time and was looking to bring, more of the road clients in to sell their stuff. We were called the Pros Closet because we were literally selling the things out of the pros closets.
You just made a very literal name up with your eBay account. Is that kind of how that started?
Exactly. It was nothing. Yeah, it was just like, we are the pros closet. And so Pete was my first employee, and he brought the road side to the business, and then he became a business partner of mine. He became part owner of the company in the early days, and Pete's still a good friend of mine, and he's a great human being, and I was really thankful for for the opportunity to start a business with him, and because it was hard. It was a lot, but when you can go through hard things with somebody that's that you enjoy doing that with, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, we were both professional bike racers at the time. So Nick was a professional mountain bike guy, and I was racing on the road.
This is Pete Lopinto, who tells us about how he ran into Nick Martin and how the Pros Closet came into his world.
And, as you do in December, January, February in Colorado, is you're putting in base miles, and, the mountain bikers become roadies for a little bit. And, we all kind of come together and ride. Nick and I were just riding together, and he had just moved to town from Grand Junction. And, I knew he was doing this little side business that he called the Pros Closet. And just talking about that and how we were selling stuff for the mountain bike guys and just on eBay, literally just out of his living room. And, it sounded like it was going well. And I was like, oh, yeah, well, I have some free time and eBay's super interesting. And, this was in the height of eBay when it was like the place. And so we just started working together with just working together, air quotes, just like it was no like business agreement. There was no anything like that. You know what I mean? It was more, hey, some of the road guys, could you talk to them and see if they have any kit to sell? Because this was also, again, the glory days of eBay where, team kit was like gold. So, you had these pro teams and, this stuff that was out there that you couldn't buy because teams weren't commercializing their kit like they are now. So on eBay, these things were like gold and they would sell for kind of ridiculous amounts of money, and like literally selling used pro chamois on eBay. And, all over the globe. That was the biggest thing because eBay was the place. If you were in a place like Australia or wherever where things didn't come into your country, you could go on eBay. And at the time it was easy, so to speak. I mean, nothing compared to what we have now in terms of global commerce and things like that. But eBay was the spot if you were an international buyer to find things, that you couldn't find in your country. So that was kind of the big thing.
Another very early employee and a key figure at the Pros Closet is a gentleman named Justin England. If that name rings a bell with some of you bike racing aficionados, that's because Justin was one of the best domestic bike racers in the US road scene in the early to mid 2000s. He's also the Pros Closet's longest serving employee.
I was a bike racer in my 20s, and as many do, ended up moving to Boulder, Colorado to be at altitude, be a part of the cycling community that is Boulder, the racing community. That was kind of why I ended up in Boulder. And as my, call it a career if you want, was winding down and I was ready to move on, I started to try and just figure out what I was going to do next. And I knew Nick and Pete at the time, who had started the Pros Closet maybe 2 years prior, and said, hey, can I have a job until I figure out what the heck I'm going to do with the rest of my life? And surprisingly, it ended up being what I'm doing with the rest of my life. I went to school for biology. I thought that maybe I'd get back into some sort of biotech or something like that. But eventually, I just enjoyed remaining connected to the bike industry through the Pros Closet. Even though I wasn't riding very much anymore, definitely wasn't racing anymore. So still got to be connected to the bicycle, to the bike industry, and grow with the Pros Closet. It was a ton of fun to be a part of. When I started, there were 4 or 5 employees, and it felt like almost every week or every month we were celebrating a new record of most sales or the highest priced bike sold or whatever, new successes all the time, just constantly. And I think, maybe the Pros Closet got a little lucky or was just well placed with being in the Boulder community. So we became this resource for the dense cycling community that is Boulder, to be an outlet for all of their bikes and cycling gear. And, obviously at the time in the beginning, we were selling exclusively on consignment and exclusively on eBay. So we were, taking products, cleaning them up, listing them on eBay, and then taking a cut when they sold.
Pete was able to sort of maybe open the world a little bit more to the road side of things. And tell me some of the early products that you kind of like, some of those sort of like, wow, I can't believe we got a hold of this to sell. Tell me about some of those early things that was like, this is gold.
Those early days were so fun. And I still, I'm a total dork about garages in general. I love going into gearheads garages and just seeing what's going on. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like if you're at a party, for me, I always end up in the garage. And I think they're
Not the kitchen.
not the kitchen. Exactly. I'm not the food guy. I'll eat anything. And I don't really care, but I love going in garages. And in those early days, we would be in, Bob Roll's garage, Lance Armstrong's garage, Davis Finney's garage. I mean, you name it, we were in their garage. It was like we were the American Pickers of the bike industry.
Yeah.
And that's how our museum started too, which is really fun. But some of the early things that I still have some of them because some of them were too amazing to sell. But we would be in like Bob Roll's garage, for example, or here I got, or John Tomac's garage, and you'll have like, this is John Tomac's. But you remember this helmet?
Yeah. Fantastic.
This is his world championship helmet. Says Tomac on the back, American Eagle. And these things would, be littered all over in different people's garages, and you'd be pulling them out and be like, holy cow, that's so cool. I would love to put that in our museum and add it to the collection. And Bob Roll, I remember he had this helmet that was from the 7-Eleven team. And on that helmet, he had written, this was back in the day when you had the cover that would, get pulled. You would have those like covers that you'd pull over your helmets. Remember those?
Yeah.
They're like the old Giro styrofoam helmets.
Uh-huh.
And he wrote, let them hate so long as they fear on the helmet. And I guess he had a sponsorship dispute with Giro. And during the race, he took off the 7-Eleven, cover, and it said that it was like part of his protest to them, and that was on his wall. And I thought it was one of the most punk rock things I've ever seen. And so I got that from Bob. I love jerseys, like the old school racing jerseys too, of actually race worn jerseys. So like Tyler Hamilton was one of my training partners. I remember he had a skin suit from Phonak with his name on the back. That just said, Hamilton, and like you get a big pile of clothes from these guys, and you'd pull them out and it'd be like extra small. It's like, who's going to wear this tiny skin suit?
Yeah.
But in one example, Tyler came in with a big bag of clothes, and I pulled out a yellow jersey, and it was in a French laundry bag. And it was one of Lance's jerseys that he had gifted Tyler afterwards for being his domestique, and it was written, to Tyler, thanks for being a great friend. You impressed a lot of people, and you will continue to do so. Thank you, Lance Armstrong. And it was from his first tour win, and he dropped it off at the shop to sell it. I pull it out and like, Tyler, I can't sell this. I'm like, what is this? He's like, oh, actually, I have 2 more of those. I'll bring them in. And from all 3 years of him being Lance's domestique, he had these, race worn leaders jerseys from Lance. They did autograph and signed. And in the last year that he wrote for Lance, it just said, to Tyler, thank you, Lance Armstrong, because at that time he already knew he was going off to be his competitor. And the saga had already.
Yeah. You could see the relationship evolution by the signatures, eh?
Yeah. So that was, so he got those 3 things, and I held on to him, and I just gave them back to Tyler when we closed down the museum. I went through this kind of a grievance thing of like giving back all of this memorabilia that I had acquired over the years from all these different athletes. But I got a chance to like reconnect with everybody. It was really cool, and like give these things back, which is kind of like, it's, they actually are like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Or like, oh, that's,
wow.
Brings back
a time capsule. Yeah.
Yeah. They're time capsules.
Yeah.
But so I could talk about, all of those things for hours. That was one of my favorite parts about our business was, the history side of it. And because we were in this used segment, it was, the gloves are off. Like we could sell anything. It was like, didn't matter if it was 30 years old or 4 years old. We would go in the early days and sell anything. So we really got to see some really cool stuff over the years. And yeah, I could go on and on about that. I'm a huge history dork, and I love cycling. So it fell naturally into my hands.
And so you would sell this on eBay, and people would bid on it or buy it now or whatever. And how did you split it with the person who was basically you were consigning it for?
Yeah, the early days it was all consignment, and I think we charged 25% of the first 400 and like 10% of the remaining amount. So it's advantageous for people to sell, things over, $400 or $500. And, and we had a minimum commission of $5 per item, and it was low risk because we had no overhead. I didn't have an inventory cost. In eBay allowed us to grow. We were on eBay for 10 years. We became the largest cycling source on eBay, and didn't need a marketing team. I didn't need a tech team. It was an easy way to reach an international marketplace because it was worldwide. And then we found out accidentally that because we were selling used things, people in other countries were actually looking to buy used over new because they didn't have to pay the same duties and imports on the used stuff as they had to the new stuff. So they would buy, stuff from us or anybody on eBay for that matter. And it was a lot cheaper to get into their country. So like 40% of our sales in the early days were international. It was a big part of our business.
Right. And we're talking around 2010-ish at this point, I imagine, hey?
2000, let's see, we were founded in 2006. Yeah, we were, till 2016 really on eBay. And we grew, we were at the end of that, we were doing, north of, 12, 13 million on eBay.
No way.
Per year. We did over $1 million in the first year on eBay, just from selling used cycling jerseys.
Here's Pete Lapinto recounting some of those early days at the Pros Closet as Nick's first employee and business partner.
At the start, it was just Nick and I like literally doing everything. Getting the gear, organizing it, doing the photography, doing the listings, doing the packing and shipping, paying people out. It was just him and I going back and forth. When he was on the road, I would do stuff in Boulder or vice versa. So it was pretty good balance. We were just doing our thing, but that led us to one of the longest standing Pros Closet employee was Justin England, because he was racing. He was big time. Like Justin was actually a real bike racer. He won big races. Yeah, he was super good. And he was transitioning out of pro and he was going to race amateur that year. And, Justin's a tiny little skinny climber, and he actually won amateur criterium nationals when it was in Downers Grove. So it was just kind of funny because he was working for us and then still trying to race. And then he ended up winning a criterium national championship. But yeah, so we had, those guys just in our community, doing packing and shipping, doing photography, doing all the things that it took to post things on eBay.
What kind of led to a departure from eBay? Were there technology restrictions that weren't letting you get to where you wanted to go? How was this business shaping in your head at this point? What did you want to do? What couldn't you do?
Yeah, eBay was an incredible partner, and I'm still a big eBay dork, and I love eBay because it's I call it snowflakes. Like the inventory is never the same; it's always changing, it's always different. So the transition from eBay into let's own our own website came when the business was growing at a rate that it was like, okay, we're making good money. We were profitable for the first 15 years, right? Like I bootstrapped it the whole way, and that was super cheap. It allowed us to grow, to a really healthy business size. Like we had about 40 employees at the height of our eBay days, and we had about a 40,000 square foot warehouse, and it was a healthy business. But when I started thinking about, okay, what is the goal here? Because I was grinding, I was working 7 days a week, and I was the CEO and the CFO and managing the books and really immersed in the business. I was single and no kids, so I was all for it. I had tons of energy to do it, and I loved it. And but I knew it was unsustainable, so I was like, what is my goal? And my goal was to get to a certain number and be back to the days of being in control of my own time and, riding my bike like I experienced, in the early days. So that was always in the back of my head. It's like, I want to go back to being in control of my own time because I felt what that was like. So I knew that growing a store on eBay would only take me so far. Like I didn't own the customer, and I didn't own the customer experience. It was eBay's. I was serving eBay's customer, and it was one in, one out, right? And when I would try to raise, I wanted to continue to grow the company, and I actually got offered to sell the company really early on by a company called Global Golf, which was the largest player on eBay for golf clubs. But they also had their own website. And in those conversations with them, they approached us because they wanted to expand outside of golf and into cycling. And they came to us and we danced with them for like 2 years. But I got to really learn their business, which was a big caveat into why I eventually raised money and decided to start our own website, was because once you own the customer and you have their information, then that's where the real value of the business, is. And if I was going to continue to own a consignment eBay store, I would never be able to sell that company. I would never be able to take it beyond what our sales were. Even though it was a healthy business generating profits, I could have kept churning that for a long time, but I would have always been grinding, and I wouldn't be able to hand that off at some point and sell it. So that's when I decided to take the customer in our own hands and start our own website and go from there.
Here's Justin England with more to say about the circumstances that led to their pivotal decision for the business to shift off of eBay and took the Pros Closet in a very different direction.
Eventually, we made the shift away from consignment, started buying inventory from end consumers. And then in, 2016 was around when we launched the proscloset.com as a standalone e-commerce site and shifted the business off of eBay. It truly started because a handful of the local bike shops in Boulder didn't want to wait for a check they just wanted to, get cash up front for their products. And so we started, once we had a good feel for what products we're going to sell for, and we could back into us making a healthy margin on those purchases, we started buying inventory from local bike shops, when they had either a couple of used bikes from end consumers in their shop, or excess inventory, sometimes some floor models, or just closeouts that they needed to get rid of. That started us down the process of actually owning inventory versus selling on consignment. And then eventually we realized, hey, we can make better margins if we're owning the inventory, paying cash up front. From the 30,000 foot view, consignment looks great because you're not having to outlay any cash for all of the inventory up front. But on the backside is a ton of back and forth communication with consigners. So if we're taking the approach of buying inventory up front rather than having this constant communication throughout the life cycle of that product as it comes through the business, back and forth with the consigners, it streamlined actually our operation and how much time we were spending on call it customer service at the time.
The move to buying stock and selling pre-owned certified bikes took the Pros Closet in a direction that became central to their value proposition. Nick saw this as their future.
I saw an opportunity. Like there was, you have eBay, you have Facebook Marketplace, you have Craigslist, you have all these other places to buy used bikes. And there wasn't a place that had like the same customer service as if you were to walk into your local bike shop, like somebody to actually like help you through the buying process, because buying a new bike is pretty complex. There wasn't an online destination that would stand behind a used product where if cracked carbon, for example, like I think 1 out of every 10 carbon bikes we would find a crack in it because even customers just didn't know. And so there's, bikes were getting more and more complex, and the opportunity to, just like the car industry, to partner with the industry essentially to be a certified destination meant we called ourselves like the Trojan horse of the bike industry, where we wanted to come in and align ourselves with every manufacturer, right? Like I don't know if that's Trojan horse is maybe the right word, but we wanted to be we wanted to come in and then support every manufacturer. So when you got on your used Specialized or your used Santa Cruz or used Cannondale, and that was your first experience with that brand, you had the best possible experience on that used bike. We saw an opportunity where every bike that isn't on a dealer floor is essentially a used bike, right? Like there's, every garage that we know of has multiple used bikes in there, and it was access to inventory was very easy, and it was unique inventory. So you weren't selling the same thing the shop down the street was selling. You were selling something that was a little different at a better price, and you had a guarantee behind it. And that's the gap that I saw in the industry that I thought, hey, this is where we're going to focus, and we're going to go after this segment because nobody else is doing it. And I had a sign in my office that said, make the industry stronger. And we're going to do that in a way that we're going to be a tool in the toolbox for the whole industry, so that we can, we can carve out a segment of the industry that nobody else is focusing on, and be our own Trojan horse in the industry, and come in and gather as much data in the process too, where I saw the opportunity, because our industry is so segmented, and there isn't, like I was mentioning, the steel dealership today, there isn't like a 360-degree view of the customer, where if I know you ride a 58 centimeter road bike with a Shimano drivetrain, and these are the parts that are going to be compatible with your bike, like you can log onto Pro's Closet. The vision was you'd be fed all of the parts that are compatible with your bike, and you'd have the opportunity to buy them new or buy them used. And if you bought it used, you'd get a better price, and it'd be guaranteed to work and be compatible with your bike. And then same with the bike shops, they could order used parts from us to service their customer who walked in and had a 9-speed Dura-Ace drivetrain that you can't go find that part anywhere else. We would be the source to supply you with that part.
Yeah. Did it start by you doing bikes on consignment, and then eventually did you pay up front, or did you have payment terms until that bike sold, which is basically consignment? How did that work at first?
Yeah, consignment was our early, the early business model, where we didn't have to have a lot of capital to be able to have inventory. So as we grew, I was writing consignment checks all the time. Like I remember Saturdays and Sundays, I would go in the office when nobody was there and just write checks, and I would probably write 800 checks a weekend.
Oh my God.
And who mails and writes checks anymore? And I would have this big stack of checks, and that was how we paid our consigners. And it just was labor intensive, and it wasn't a good workflow. So, and it was also like negotiating back and forth. Let's say you were selling a bike with us, and we knew that the value of that bike, we had a price too high and it just wasn't going to sell at that price. We would have to go to you and say, hey, Wade, we think we need to drop this bike, and this is the right price where it needs to be in order for it to sell. And there was a lot of back and forth to manage all these individual, right? So as we scaled, we wanted to be in control of that inventory, in control of what we were pricing it for, get you paid as quickly as possible. So the idea was own the inventory. And if we own the inventory, we would need a lot more capital to be able to do that. So that's when we decided to raise money.
How did that capital raise sort of go? How did that journey start, and where did it lead you at your first round? Because I know that from experience, it can be a very difficult process, but also acknowledging you're in Boulder, which is, as we both said, is a very unique place of people, passionate cyclists, money, technology. It's probably the best place for you to exist.
It was.
How did that all go?
It was, again, this is my first job, so I was a student as I was growing the business. I was constantly studying whatever it was I was dealing with, whether it was raising money and learning about venture capital, which is a whole rabbit hole of, thankfully, the cycling community has a lot of business minds in it, and you're able to go on a 3-hour bike ride with them and talk. Like Robin Thurston's a good example outside, and be able to go for a ride with Robin and just pick his brain as much as possible on that ride. And then he's like, okay, I'm going to connect you with this person. And the way I got connected in Boulder was, I couldn't have done this in Wisconsin. It was just that community in rural Wisconsin didn't exist, where in Boulder it was, people were happy to help and lend a hand and connect me with people. I had a unique process raising, where a lot of people would have to go pitch, 100 times before they would get money. Every person I pitched in the early days, I raised money from. I think my batting average was 100%. I raised um, over the span, I think like $60 million. I think that's how much the Pros Closet actually raised, give or take. And I don't know if I ever got turned down.
Did you like create a business plan, pitch deck, make it look polished, or was this through fairly organic conversations that not much due diligence was done and so forth? Or did you find lead investors? How did that sort of happen for you?
Yeah, so it was more, we did eventually have, proper business plan. And it wasn't like, some of these smaller businesses were like, oh yeah, friends and family gave 5 grand. This person gave 10 grand. It was never anything like that. It would more got to that point of, hey, if we're going to do it, it's going to be a sizable investment and it's going to be something real. And because of probably what we learned with just friends working for us, we went outside of the friend family network, and, went down more of that traditional, well, we're going to start interviewing people. They're not going to interview us. We're going to interview them and see what they're all about, because we had some great people in our corner and we realized pretty quick that we were in the driver's seat and we could dictate, air quotes, dictate terms, even though we didn't really know what that meant at the time. It was more just like, oh, wow, people are interested in us. This is fascinating position to be in. Um, but again, we didn't know what we didn't know, and we didn't really know what we needed. We just knew we needed something that we couldn't buy off the shelf, and we knew something that was bigger than just hiring a friend who knew how to write some code to build a website. We knew it was bigger than that. Um, but again, at the time, we didn't know even what the potential was because it didn't exist in terms of used bikes, trade in, buying overstock, all those kinds of things that we were doing at the time. Um, yeah, we just knew that we needed help and we weren't smart enough to do it ourselves. So we knew that there was smart people out there, and obviously you got to give up a share of the business to do that. Um, but that was okay because we knew it was bigger than what it was, and we knew obviously having a smaller piece of a big pie, is going to be way more beneficial down the road than what we were doing then.
Yeah, at the beginning, it was very much, hey, come see what we do. It was always like, come to us, let us walk you through what we're doing. And we would just knock it out of the park because the business had this energy about it. Especially if you're a cyclist, you come in and there's just gear everywhere and you see the process. And we were very, very organized. I think one of the things that led to our success is like we were a lean manufacturing mindset and company from the very early days. So everything was very organized. You could see the process and how it worked. Anybody could see it and how it worked just by walking through it. And everyone was very impressed with that when they would come through it and see that. And it kind of spoke volumes, and it really breathed confidence into the conversation. And then, the numbers talk too. Like we were growing 100% year over year for I don't know how many years. It was a high growth environment, very energizing. We were profitable, that speaks a lot to it. Like I wasn't looking for money. I think one of the lessons I learned is that when you need money, that's the worst time to be raising. Like you always want to be raising when you don't need money, because the conversation goes so much easier. So we didn't need money in the early days per se. Like we could have survived at a smaller, size. And then once we did raise money, we did what we said we were going to do. And we hit our marks and our growth projections really every single time. And that made it a lot easier to raise money and instill investor confidence.
Yeah. I have in my notes in 2017, I think it was, that your Series A with the Foundry Group was your first raise. Is that
Yep.
accurate?
That was our second, actually.
The second.
Yeah, Ridgeline was our first raise. I think we raised $2.5 million a year before that. And that was the idea there was to build a website with that, and then bring in a couple tech people and And then Foundry Group is a Boulder venture group here in Boulder. They got a unique model where they build a network of CEOs and CFOs, and you can actually you have access to all the other companies. So I build relationships with them, and again, surrounding yourself with people. So that was really interesting to me to be able to tap into this executive network to help. It's like CEO therapy per se for me to be able to learn and ask questions and navigate that high growth environment, which is really scary and intense. And my nervous system was just baxed out all the time in a different way, in a fun way. It was like I was energized, but it was exhausting.
Yeah. And through all of this, you're giving away equity to these new investors in that. Were you still majority shareholder and made all the decisions and stuff in these early days?
Yep. I was one of the things that led us to be profitable in those days was that I was also the CFO. I was in the books, and my first thing every day I did, I'd wake up and I'd download all the transactions, and I saw what was happening in the business. And I think that color gave me the lay of the land. I knew what was going on, and there weren't any secrets. And then as the company grew, it was just unscalable for me to be that deep into the business. So I had to get out of the weeds, and I just didn't have as much. How I understood the business was a lot really through the numbers, and it was harder for me to stay in control of the business when we were growing that fast. And I started to delegate the numbers and get out of the books.
In around 2020, obviously that's when COVID happened and the very cheap capital became available. You did another, I think it was a $12 million raise through Edison and Foundry Group. And that's when you went to a massive warehouse, like the size of Costco, from what I understand. Was that a step, a milestone in the business that there's anything to talk about there? How did COVID go for you? Because you seemed like the winner of all of that. When no one else could supply bikes, you had bikes. Tell me about that time.
Yeah, that was actually the $12 million round was actually earlier. That was when Foundry came in. And they came, and so we were in, I think then about 20,000 to 30,000 square feet, give or take. And then we actually had multiple warehouses at different times, because in Boulder, there's not a lot of warehouses around here. So we had to be really creative, and we ended up, in multiple locations.
The enormous size of the warehouse in Louisville was seen by many in hindsight as an indication of the pros closet's overambitious plans. But Justin has a much more straightforward explanation for that.
Yeah, so we were Boulder born and raised, right? Went through 5 different warehouses or iterations of warehouses within Boulder. Louisville, we moved into in the beginning of 2020. That was after kind of the second major influx of investment came in, and that was when we first brought in some private equity venture capital investment, which I think gave us a massive foundation to be able to build off of. But it also came with us targeting massive sales growth every year and building the business towards not the $10 million business we were at the time, but building very quickly to, hey, this could be a $500 million company. And that was the intention behind, hey, instead of what had been the process of let's get a warehouse that's 50% bigger, let's get a warehouse that's 30% bigger, let's just jump and get a warehouse that's 5 times bigger than what we have to.
It was larger than a city block, or the warehouse that we moved into. It was 140,000 square feet. I just remember going into the parking lot and being like, this parking lot is this is crazy. Who's going to snowplow this thing? And going from the mindset of the early days, and where my mindset always was buying used is the greenest way to shop. And we used to buy used furniture. We used to buy used racking. We would take our time, and everything we bought around us was used. It was part of our DNA of selling used bikes. It was, we would buy used scissors, for example, these metal scissors, and it just like weird things like that. That it was like it was in our DNA to all of a sudden buying like all of this infrastructure to scale this company without having this like, when you have venture money behind you, they're like grow at all costs, right? When you see an opportunity, they double down on it. I remember one investor saying, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." Where it's like, okay, we're gonna capitalize on this opportunity here, and grow and take advantage of the growth, and then our valuation as a company because of the massive growth, and then owning all of the customer information, is only going to grow the valuation of the company and allow us to either sell the company or raise more money. And we created a lot of debt in that process, meaning like overhead, where as the business started to contract, it was hard to right size the business with so much overhead.
Justin, during COVID, there was a sense that this bubble would last forever. Was it openly talked about that the bubble would eventually burst and that just nobody knew when? Or what was the feeling like at that time?
Yeah, it was fantastic. I mean, so you can imagine, let's use a simple example of a 3-year-old stump jumper. Normally during pre-pandemic times, that bike is worth about 60% of the original MSRP, just on average. Like I said, during the pandemic, that bike we had to put safeguards in place to make sure we weren't selling it above MSRP. We were able to, not only in that time, you think about our supply as well, because resale values were so inflated, we were making relatively incredible offers to end consumers to buy their bike. A customer who had bought their bike in 2018, who came to sell to us in 2020, we're telling them that we're still going to buy it from them for 30% less off the MSRP, which in anybody's mind, if you buy something in a bike and 3 years later you can sell it for 70% of the original MSRP, fantastic. So we were able to maintain supply throughout the pandemic, while the rest of the bike industry, bike shops, weren't able to get inventory at all. So you're right, we were booming during the pandemic, but we were putting in place habits, thinking that we were going to continue to do this, and didn't prepare well enough for when the tides changed.
Nick's recollection of that crazy COVID period is pretty much identical to everybody else's in the bike industry.
In COVID, we thought we're out of it. Like, what's going on? We're gonna have to send everybody home, and then, cycling is it was deemed a viable business during that time, that we could actually go to work, and you didn't have access to inventory anywhere else. And we tapped into the secondhand market, and everybody had bikes in their garage. They were home, so they were likely to sell their bike. But then there were also all these new players, people that were interested in cycling because it was the safest way to get out and exercise. So we benefited from the boom, and we saw our business go from, a solid, steady Eddie business, churning, I guess we were churning like 50 or 60 bikes a day, to, starting to forecast 100 to 150 bikes a day that we were processing and selling. And our sell-through rate was, I think, 4 or 5 days. So if that bike hit the website, it was sold in 4 days at the longest. So all of a sudden, it's just like operational efficiency became the focus. But when you grow that fast, all this infrastructure gets layered onto the business, and it's really easy to layer infrastructure on. It's really hard to take that layer, peel back the layers of the onion and scale back a business.
From what little I know about you, Nick, you do sound like someone who is, like leads a fairly simple life, minimalist life, and this is quite the contrary journey to that. Grow at all costs and all that. How did that sit with you at the time, and with your values?
It didn't sit well, and that's why I stepped off. I think there was a letter I wrote to the company. I published it on Brain about, when I said goodbye. I essentially handed the reins to another CEO, and I was like, I had a number in my head of what I wanted to live, and when I got to that number, I made a commitment to myself to do what I said I was going to do, which is go back to being in control of my own time. So that opportunity came in COVID when the business was, growing. I, the investors around the table wanted a sophisticated CEO that could, raise more money and sell the company for a higher valuation, someone that was more polished than I was, because, I wasn't polished by any means. It's my first job, right? I'm still learning on the gun. And, there was definitely times when that showed over, a lot of times that showed. And, so they wanted to bring in someone that was more sophisticated in the high growth environment. And we had a board member that stepped into my CEO shoes. And when I did that, I sold a majority of my shares, to give me, I guess there's like this founder's mentality of like, you hold on really tight, right? Like, and I have that, like, I built that thing, like it was my baby. I'm holding on tight. And in order for me to let go and let somebody else come in and run it, I needed to know that was, for me, everything else was rolling the dice and I was okay. And I'm very, very thankful that I made that decision, because otherwise I would be sitting here with nothing. And now I'm in control of my own time and I have the opportunity to be full-time dad. And so it was a very hard thing. And my voice, as I tried to stay in the company after that. But when you see decisions being made and just it's operating, like when we moved into that warehouse, the huge warehouse, I wanted to bring in the museum, and we brought in the museum, for example. And I remember the new CEO was like, "What are all these old bikes doing around the warehouse? Like, what are these things?" And I'm like, "Dude, this is like, you bring any industry partner into this office and they're going to freak out." We had over 300 historic bikes. And when he called it, "What are all these old bikes doing everywhere?" I was like, "Yeah, this isn't going to work." There was a lot of signs on the wall of like, that just started to make, it didn't feel right. Like it wasn't a good transition for me. And, I had to step away, and I eventually got pushed out off the board. As a founder, your voice carries a lot of weight. And when you're in the office and you see things going, I can't help but speak up and say my point of view and tell what I think. And it created a lot more friction in the business than the new CEO, wanted. And I need to focus on growing this business, doing what the board wants me to do. And, I became, an annoying founder, voice. And it's unfortunate. And that's one of the hard parts about scaling a company, is because the business is going to outgrow you, and that's a good thing. And the business did outgrow me. And I was just thankful that I was able to experience that education and get to that point. And in hindsight, I look back and I was like, I think I knew what I was doing. I was like, I think I knew that business really well, and I knew how to continue to grow that business. And I think I heard somewhere like Shimano, I think they grow like 5% year over year. They have like I think it was on one of your podcasts, you talked about it. Like, that's brilliant, because that keeps business healthy and right sizes that business. And these huge ebb and flows that happen, in any market, we can be really reactionary to that, or we can jump on this opportunity at all costs and grow at all costs. But that comes with, a cost. It comes with a cost. I lived and breathed it. I saw it. And we started to get outside of where our sweet spot was. And the more that you layer on complexities of an organization, it can topple over. The bigger you are, the harder you fall.
Yeah. I remember reading that letter, Nick, that you were stepping down, and John Levisay, I think his name is, who is the CEO. I remember reading it thinking, like, knowing that how hard it is for any founder to see the business kind of outgrow them, but also too, you always get to a scale where, like, this is not, I'm not trained for this, right? Like, I knew how to build something, but it's a very different skill on how to build it past a point. And I remember reading that thinking, like, how poised and mature and everything you were around how you went about saying that, but also wondering if the reality was like, did you get pushed aside, or was this a choice of yours? And I think you just mentioned it was more or less a push, hey, which is got to have been tough at the time.
It was a push, but I was, happy to take it because all of a sudden that was my goal. I had a goal, right? And I had a number and I written down, it was on my desk and I looked at it every day. And I hit that number. So it was like, okay, that was a chapter in education for me. I got it to that point, but I still saw that there was so much more work to be done. It still felt like it was just the beginning. And but I had made a commitment to myself and a commitment to the business to what I felt was the right thing at the right time to do that. I think looking back on that, a big mistake that I made was not bringing a cycling mind to the head of the organization, someone that really knew our customer. Because when you have, like, John was really good at content and commerce. He had started this company called Craftsy, which was like an online craft. Like you would take a class of learn how to quilt, and you could also buy all the quilting materials. So he had the content and commerce expertise, and he was a really good storyteller too. And he could raise money, and he could bring people along with him, especially when you get in front of a company. And when I stepped aside, there was like 200 employees. When I would get up in front of the company to talk, it was terrifying. Like I was like, this is a lot. This is like uncomfortable for me all the time, and I'm not very good at public speaking, or at least I didn't think I was very good at public speaking. And it was always a struggle, and he was really good at it. And so I was like, okay, he's gonna be a better steward of the company moving forward. So I was okay with stepping down. I had gotten, I got into my number, and I was gonna be able to be in control of my own time, which ultimately is the one thing that none of us can go by, is our time. And I saw that in the early days of training and riding full time, was how amazing it was to be in control of your own time. So that was always my own goal, was to get back to that point, which I succeeded in. But it came, it still was really hard to see the business and say goodbye to the business essentially, and not be like at the decision making part of that, because there's so much energy and things that feed an entrepreneur in that way, that you lose that. And when you're not the decision maker, somebody else is. And it's hard to be when the person's making decisions that you don't think are right for the business. It's hard to see that.
Yeah. How would you describe your management style up until that point? Were you quite a hands-off person? Were you quite in the weeds?
Yeah.
How would you?
Oh, I was very much in the weeds. I think anybody that it would talk about it would know I was. So I love the business. I love process. I love numbers. I'm a CEO or a leader that is going to be on the floor with the people in lean manufacturing. They call it the Gemba. With like Toyota is a great example. Like I would study Toyota manufacturing processes, where you as a leader, if something is wrong, you go to the floor and see what's going on to be able to understand, what to do and how to make the right decision. An example of that is like internally routed cables became the norm in our industry, and that added a lot of complexity to a certification process. So how do you solve for that when your margins are already tight and you have to be super efficient on the floor? You have to develop a process now that is servicing an internally routed system, which is really complicated. And I need to understand that problem. So I need to be alongside the mechanics. I need to be right on the floor. I would be picking up tools. I'd be working. I knew how to do everybody's job. And that's, as a CEO, it's overbearing in a lot of ways to be like that. But that's what I love to do. Like I said, I'm a tool dork. I love working on bikes. I love mechanics. So I loved being on the floor. I loved washing bikes. I think when John Levisay took over the job, the first thing I did with him the first day was take him into the bike wash, and we washed bikes. So, and I immediately saw that we're two very different people, right? Like I want you to understand what's happening on the floor. And so here's, this is the product that we're selling. This is what we do. Understand the process, understand how the sausage is made. Because you can understand your problems and understand business and what you need to do and how to scale that. So that's what I did. And I was very hands-on to a fault, but that's who I was and who I am.
This podcast is fully funded by our members at Escape Collective. In fact, All of our content on our website and our podcast network is 100% supported by our members who believe that cycling media should be independent from the sport and industry we cover, and that we should exist to serve you rather than live or die by our ability to be a platform for the sole purpose of selling you more stuff. If you enjoy this podcast or any of our other work and believe in our mission of independence, please go to escapecollective.com/join and become a member today. Thank you for your support. In October 2021, you guys acquired the Rattled. Can you tell me about the strategy, that the thinking behind that, seeing as you already had a content department, and what did you feel that was going to do for the business? Who made that happen and all that?
When we brought on TCG, the Chernin Group, they were, the content commerce strategy, and the idea there was to, like, we were paying Google essentially to get eyeballs, right? Like, we were a slave to that whole Google engine of, having to pay to drive traffic. And we wanted to be able to be part of the vernacular in the industry and be providing content that people want to come read about, even when they're not shopping for a bike. And then, oh yeah, I can shop as well as read about bikes. And what I loved about the Ratavis, and I love about the Ratavis, is they're authentic. They're passionate, right? That was, and they're really good at content. And we weren't. Like, we were great at selling used bikes, but to all of a sudden have this switch in our strategy where we had to bring in all of this complex content's not easy. Like, it's not easy to be good at content. And it can be very expensive if you're not good at it. And we weren't good at it. So we had content, but we were spending a lot of money trying to figure it out. So we were like, okay, build versus buy. Let's bring in somebody that's really good at it, that already has, an established, reader base, and then double down on that. So we bought the Ratavist. And ultimately, I look back on it, and it was added a lot of complexity to our business. Like, we were trying to figure out this content side of it when we were really good at selling used bikes. And maybe we should have, as I look back, maybe we should have just stayed, trying to sell used bikes, because we spent a lot of money trying to figure out content. And that's a hungry cycle. It never stops. Hungry beast. Yeah. Yeah.
Was this a bit of an investor request that you guys got to do this and you're kind of forced into that? Or was it a feeling of this is a stroke of brilliance, or how did it come about?
Yeah, it was more of an investor thing where they were, TCG also owned a company called Hodinkee, which was, do you know Hodinkee? They're a high-end watch. I think they actually went out of business as well. I'm not sure, but I think they were bought by Crown and Caliper, another watch company. But they,
I think Hodinkee bought Crown and Caliper, and Crown and Caliper doesn't exist anymore. Their website has no product, but Hodinkee, I think, might have bought it back and are just focusing on content now. But yeah, another similar story, isn't it?
Yeah. That was like the model that they were looking for. And I go back to it, and it just wasn't what we were good at. And when your business is growing that fast and that's working, like, why layer all these other things that, are shiny objects, in my opinion? And we should have just stepped. It wasn't sexy per se, of like, we're bike mechanics and we're gonna work on certify pre-owned bikes. Maybe not the sexiest story, but it was what we were really good at. We built a very healthy business doing it. We knew how to be profitable there. And then we tried to be something we weren't, and it cost a lot of money.
What was your involvement day to day at this point, when things from COVID really started to come to a head and the market started going the opposite direction? What was your day to day like?
I was I was on the board, and I never felt like I was really welcome. I had an office there, like I could go in, and I would go in and go into the office here and there, but it always was like, Nick, what are you doing? Like, me and the CEO were butted heads, and there was a friction there. And I was like, I had to like tell him what I was doing that day or whatever. And there was, it, I just felt alienated. I felt like I was a stranger in my own company, but it wasn't my company at that point. Like I'd already sold most of my shares and I owned less than 10% of the company at that time. Maybe it was like 6%, um, give or take. And, so I stayed home and I've been building trails and I haven't really been involved for like 4 or 5 years. When I wrote that letter as stepping out from the CEO, that was really when I stepped down and was really out of the day-to-day of the company.
Was that a tough transition for you at first?
Very tough. I don't know how to same with when I stopped racing professionally, I was in the best shape of my life, right? And I never will be in that shape again when I step down from racing. And there's a grievance that happens there of like, the older I get, the faster I was, but like you just can't ever get back to that point. No matter how much I would ride, I just never would be there. So it just changed, right? Riding changed for me. Same with the business. It was like I was in it, and I was just like, it was what I lived and breathed, and
It was your identity, I imagine. No?
100%.
Yeah. Like that's you, your second name, practically, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And like losing the email, Nick at the Pros Closet, it was like, wow, it's like a funeral of sorts for me. Like that's all me processing that. But it really is, you put so much energy into something. And like I said, it was a privilege to be able to grow the company and have that education. It was the best education I could have ever asked for. But it's hard.
Yeah.
It's a funeral of sorts. It's a grievance. Process it. You transition into a new chapter, and I'm thankful for what I learned in that process. But I'm also, I still grieve it. I still miss it, and I miss the people. I miss the energy of going into the office every day. I miss the bikes, right? And yeah, there's unfinished business
Yeah. Okay.
for sure.
Yeah.
Totally.
Interesting. It sounds like, you were able to take some money off the table and selling your shares as the investment came in, and was that any reconciliation to how you felt? Like, did that at least I built something, got a return out of my investment? Was that a positive in your life?
Massive, huge. Yeah. I mean, I don't say retired because it's a weird word, but like I'm in control of my own time, right? Like I did that before my dad my dad retired last year. And, I'm very, very thankful to be able to be, making my own decisions. What am I going to do with my own time? Where am I going to spend my energy? Spend it with my kids. Like I'll never get that time back. And, huge amount of gratitude for what the business has given me. And like, I look back and I'm the only one that made money on that whole deal. All those investors, lost all their investment. And I was able to make a right decision at the right time. Because I had good people around me. I had one advisor that I'm super thankful for, that every time we raise money, he's like, you always take money off the table because you never know if the opportunity is going to come again. And every time I did that, we raised money 4 or 5 times, probably 5 times. And I would buy a house. And with that money, like I would always buy one house whenever I took money off the table here in Boulder. So I had a real estate portfolio if the business didn't work out that I could fall back on. So that's one of the things I'm doing today is managing the real estate, and essentially going to Home Depot and fixing, stuff. Like it's just different.
Buying tools.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's a really good point though, because I don't know if a lot of people really understand that, like, when you create a business, it becomes an investment. Your whole life savings is tied up in it. And just like any investment, if you had it in the stock market, you'd be taking money off as it goes up, right? And like you say, you don't know when you're going to have that opportunity again, because it's not as liquid as the S&P 500 or anything in there. So I think it's people don't understand that. And I think as well too, there's a lot of or maybe let me ask you, do you feel there was any resentment from employees, investors, stakeholders that you were able to do that, and maybe some of them didn't? What do you think they would say?
Yeah, I don't think there is any resentment. I guess I don't know. Never one's ever said anything to my face. But I worked really hard. Like I was there every day, 7 days a week. Like I definitely earned everything that I did. It wasn't like I was just piggybacking on anything. It was, blood, sweat, and tears for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So I definitely feel, and I made, the investors, invested in us because they believed in us, right? And then when I stepped aside as CEO, that's when I said in order for me to do that, if I'm going to pass the reins to somebody else, I need to be able to sell X amount for me to be able to walk away and pass those reins, because otherwise I'm going to want to hold on too tight. And so they all agreed to that. So everyone made decisions that they were well aware of. And I think, we were employee owned company as well. Employees all had shares that they would earn as the company grew, which eventually were not worth anything. But that was one of my, if I look back, is like I always wished the people that helped in the early days, we could have had a liquidity event for them, but we never got to profitability. We never were making money once we started taking on capital and we tried to grow at the rate we were growing. We went from being a profitable entity to be a cash hungry organization that really needed to right size versus growing at all cost.
Justin England has landed on his feet and is now part of a small team who are rebuilding the Pros Closet. After a few months of reflection since the business shut down, Justin is positive and doesn't feel hard done by. But as he says, others might hold on to some resentment.
I don't know how the investors feel, because largely they lost all of their money. But they're also probably positioned to be able to absorb those losses. Let's be honest there. I think from my perspective and from, speaking on behalf of, I'm going to guess there were probably 350, 400 employees that worked for the Pros Closet over the last 15 years. I think there's a sentiment that, early days, we were all working together and building something together that, it wasn't just this day job that we were going and clocking in and taking home a paycheck. It felt like, or I think maybe we now all naively thought that we were building something together that was going to create potentially an outcome for all of us. And I think in the end, if you just look at the result of it all, Nick was really the only one who's walked away with something to show for it. I kind of said it before, but I'm in a unique spot of being able to be a part of this second version of the Pros Closet and help bring the business back to life. So I don't know if I would change anything without how it's played out, because I'm in a really good position now. I get to be a part of building something together. But that can't be said for everybody who was involved with the Pros Closet over the first 15 years.
I saw a lot of criticism online about later years when, the value exchange between the people who you bought bikes from versus what you guys sold it for was becoming like a wider discrepancy.
Yeah.
Was there a problem with the business model in hindsight? I do note that, Cycling Avenue in Canada did also shut down, I think roughly, I can't remember in comparison, but in hindsight, was there a problem long-term with the business model, or do you still believe in it? Where could it have been improved?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, there's a problem with the business model, but it can be profitable, but it has to be run extremely efficiently. And let me expand on that a little more, because the bike, first off, you make an offer on a bike, right? And that offer has to have enough margin in it for the bike to get shipped to you, for it to get unboxed, for us to go through this process where we bring it up to our standards, for us to rebox it, to ship it back to the new customer. And that's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of touch points on a bike that has 35 components or something like that, we're inspecting and torquing every bolt and making sure. There's a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong. So you have to, first off, you have to purchase the right bikes. You don't want all the bikes coming through the funnel, because a lot of bikes are heavily worn, and that means it's going to create more labor and essentially erode your margin. So we would call them lawyer bikes. The best bikes for our business to buy were the bikes that look like they're barely ridden, right? The bikes that someone bought and they, ended up in the garage. And it's like the Porsche customer versus the Subaru customer, where there's a bunch of Cheerios in the back seat, there's a couple car seats, or the car that was ridden, driven maybe once a month, that's garage kept underneath a tarp. Like, those bikes are easy for us to process, a lot less labor involved, and essentially we can secure our margin by doing that. So we would look for those bikes, and we would have to give advantageous offers to bikes that weren't in that condition for us to be able to make our margin to be able to run a viable business. So what ended up happening, like when I say the business needs a CEO that is a cyclist, essentially, because they have to understand who our customer is, because the customer is also the person that we're buying our inventory from. It's not just the person that we're selling our inventory from. We learned that the people buying the bikes from us are not the same people that are selling the bikes, right? We learned that those are two different categories. And that's because the people that are looking for a good deal are always going to buy used, and the people that are selling us their bikes are probably, a lot of times we found out they're in the industry, or maybe they thought they were going to be a cyclist, but they ended up not really getting into it. And it was, there were two different customers. We needed to understand who that customer is. So we would offer them a low number, because we would need to make our margin to be able to sell that bike for X. And that margin, on each bike was somewhere around, I think, $1,300, something like that. We'd have to make, or $1,000, and our average sale price was north of $3,000. So these bikes were, 5 years old at the oldest. And in order to do that, you would essentially lowball a lot of these people that are trying to see what their bike is worth. We're not going to buy a bike that we know we're going to lose money on. It's just not good business. But we need to, also with the economies of scale, we would have to process, minimum of like 40 to 50 bikes a day to be able to support the infrastructure that we had at a minimum. So as soon as you fall below that, you really have to what we would do is have to make more, because it could look at as greedy offers, but it was like, that's what we needed to make on that bike in order for us to sell it. And the less bikes that we sold, the more margin. It just didn't make sense, because we had so much infrastructure that we were trying to pay for.
Tell me, from where you sat, what did you see happening in the business, during the end of COVID, when we started hearing reports of things aren't going well and so forth? Do you have insight to what happened at that time, or were you a bystander and only knew what you had read and maybe heard, or what was that time like for you?
Well, we saw, supply and demand kicks in, right? And we saw all of a sudden this, like, all of these customers that we thought were going to continue to be cyclists. It was like, hey, we're cyclists for COVID, but now we're back to going to yoga on Tuesdays and not riding our bikes. And that bike, now I have a bike to sell, but I'm not going to be a cyclist moving forward. So we over indexed for, just the growth in the sport, where really the growth is kind of right sizing back to where it always has been, year over year. And I think our industry, our sport, is still healthy. It's just, we thought it was going to explode and be much bigger than it actually was. So our business, we made some, we over indexed for growth, and we thought that customer was always going to be a customer. But it wasn't. So we had, we were trying to sell bikes to the same people that were already cyclists. And like I said, the person that's buying the bike is not the same person that's selling us the bike. So we had there's a lot more supply out there, and supply and demand kicks in and just drives down the price of used bikes right now. It's a great time to buy a bike if you're looking to get a great deal on a great bike. But we just started to see our sell-through rates slow down, and sell-through was always like our compass of how healthy our inventory was. And we always had really strong sell-through rates. If we held on to a bike for 45 days, that was like a really long time, and you have to start dropping the prices. But all of a sudden it became 70 days, and our inventory turn just started really slowing down, which we also started buying new bikes, which was, in my opinion, probably not the best strategy, because we were like, I'll give the option to buy a new one or a used one, but then that inventory just, you end up parking a lot of capital in that inventory, and we're competing then with bike shops. And, instead of having a snowflake of a bike that's 3 or 4 years old that you can't go buy somewhere else, we ended up with a lot of inventory that everybody else was discounting and couldn't sell it. And yeah, we're throwing good money at bad.
Yeah, no, I think everybody saw it coming, but felt maybe like we were, I don't know, a freight train that couldn't be stopped at some point. I think, to be honest, I think the pressures of accelerated growth from our investors were what ultimately caused us to really build habits that weren't able to pivot quickly enough when the pandemic demand fell off a cliff, right? Like, so we took on significant investment at the beginning of 2020, moved to this new building, perfectly timed for the COVID boom that happened for the next 2 years, right? It was outrageous. We were having to put safeguards in place to make sure that we weren't selling used bikes for more than the original MSRP, just because that doesn't feel right. But all of our data, all of our algorithm was telling us that some bikes were worth more than they were originally retailed for, just because the demand was so high at that time and bike shops didn't have inventory. So resale skyrocketed. And then there's a very clear moment in the fall of 2022 when I think largely the supply chain in the primary market caught up, and all of a sudden there was bikes available at the same time that all the COVID restrictions were largely being lifted. And so people were going back to going to the gym, going to yoga, going to spending disposable income on everything that they would normally spend their income on when during the pandemic, cycling was one of the things that people were able to still continue to spend on. So we put in place, I think, habits in our business that didn't allow us to pivot quickly enough when the demand fell off. And that slowly put us into a hole with a bunch of owned inventory that was overpriced. We had priced it at the height of the market and, bought it here, but now it's worth this. And we should have been buying it here, but we're sitting with a whole bunch of overpriced inventory that we had to slowly liquidate.
And in 2024, I think there was another big fundraising, Series C, of around 20 million. Now, was this a trying to buy the business out of trouble? What was this was this debt that the company took on that you are aware of that needed to service that debt? What was that?
It was twofold. Part of it was to service a debt, and then another one was to give us a runway to sell the company. So, and you never want to sell a company when you need to sell a company. Yeah. So the business was distressed, and we tried to right-size the business and extend the runway so we could do so. And again, we brought in another CEO that wasn't a cyclist, and it's hard to talk to what makes the company great, and why should you buy us when you don't understand the customer that well, and it's the pitch doesn't just come off the tongue and land as strong when you don't understand the customer and the opportunity, especially in our industry.
Yeah. Who would you have sold it to? What kind of strategic? It wasn't going to go public, I don't imagine. No one was going public at that time. It wasn't the right business to go public. What was the exit strategy? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, we tried to. I mean, like Pink Bike was a potential partner because they're obviously have a great marketplace, great content strategy, and
that would have been outside at the time.
Exactly. But they were, and most of their audience or their marketplace is in Canada. So opportunity to bring that more into into North America. And they look at the financials and they're like, why would we buy this right now? And again, going back to, you don't want to sell the company when you need to, because, you look at the financials and you're like, well, I'm just going to wait to buy this company until it's in distress, or if I really want it. So, the writing was on the wall there in terms of like where the company was going. And so outside, potentially Pink Bike was one potential one. And then there's company, like Specialized or Trek, for example, that want to, wrap their arms around the used marketplace. And we were a data engine. Like we knew, like for example, geometry of every manufacturer that's out there, compatibility, pricing, right? Like who's riding what. We had tons of customer information. And for a manufacturer to be able to have access to that is really valuable. And when your customer is bringing in a Cannondale to trade up at a Specialized dealer, you don't want that Cannondale sitting on your sales floor. Like where does that bike go? So, we could become an extension of, a solution to the industry for whether it's overstock or trade-ins or just customer data. So the manufacturers were interested in us, different manufacturers, but the price wasn't right, and you could see the writing on the wall. And we were bleeding cash, and
the industry was in trouble. Like how no one's getting money to buy businesses at this time. They're just hunkering down.
Exactly. Yeah, they have their own problems to solve right now.
Yeah. So the decline to it being shut down, what was the visibility to you of that? How did you see that playing out?
At this point, I'd already been pushed off the board, so I didn't have.
Yeah.
I knew we were trying to sell the company. Like I knew that was going on, and I was skeptical on that being successful. And so I went into the company and started pulling out the museum because I didn't want the doors to get shut and have all of other people's stuff in it. So I spent, probably a year as the company was, for sale, like unwinding the museum. So that's as much as involvement as I had in the day-to-day at that time was, coming in and taking things off the wall, which is kind of a sad, depressing thing because that was the culture, the DNA of the company on the walls, and, and then, slowly, making sure all of that returned back to the rightful owners. And that was a whole logistical process, but that was it for me. That was about as much visibility or, my decision-making at that time. I'd already gotten kind of pushed out at that time and wasn't on the board and wasn't involved in decision-making.
Tell me about the time you found out about the businesses shutting down. How did that feel?
I already knew what was going to happen. I grieved the company a year earlier than I think people actually knew that the company was going out of business. I already had grieved it, and it doesn't feel good. It feels like, it's a huge loss. Like it's really sad. We put a lot of energy into that. We had a great company. We had a great model. We could have been could, woulda, shoulda, right? There's a lot of different things we could have done. But it's hard to see a business that has a right to win. Like we had first movers advantage in the industry and the used space, but we couldn't execute, and we missed the mark on some big initiatives, and ultimately, somebody has the right to win in the pre-owned space. It's a huge. I mean, every bike that's not on a dealer floor is essentially a used bike. So, somebody has to own that space, and somebody will. I know the Pros Closet has a new owner, and they're coming back, and there's a lot of people around the table that were employees and had learned a lot in that process. And my hope is that they take what they learned and can use that and reflect on that and be successful and do it again. But I know it's complex. You have to be super efficient and leverage data and buy the right bikes and not get over your skis and stay scrappy.
Nick had been removed from the business at the point at which it was shutting down, but Justin was still on the ground cleaning up the mess.
It was bizarre, if I'm frank. So technically, the company fell into what was called an ABC, assignment for the benefit of creditors. It's a form of bankruptcy. It's not technically a bankruptcy, but a firm came in, essentially took control of the company. Obviously, kept a group of us on to help wind everything down. Um, but as we were winding down, we were able to make decisions like every customer, every end consumer who sold us a bike, we made sure that they got paid out. Um, uh, all of our employees who were, and last summer we had 80 employees still. Um, all of our employees got a 2-month severance package before the end. So we were able to provide something for all the employees. Um, and then, effectively we ran this going out of business sale to liquidate all of the inventory. And then this firm came in and ran in tandem an auction for all of the physical infrastructure within the Louisville warehouse, as well as an auction for the entire digital infrastructure, the brand name, the customer list, the IP, our software systems.
What's your outlook to the new ownership of the Pros Closet? And do you think they have what it takes to so-called win this infinite game?
My expectation would be if I was buying a company, I'd want to like learn as much as possible and like reach out to the previous owner. But I actually had to reach out to him and say, hey, I'm Nick, I'm the founder, over here. And maybe it was part of my ego that I had to like put some closure on it to be able to talk to the new owner and just introduce myself. But we had, like a 30-minute conversation and I introduced myself, but that was about it.
How weird for you though, hey? How weird for
So
you
weird.
having someone, was it? Yeah?
So weird. It was super weird. Yeah, it's just, it's really weird. It's hard to put words to what that feels like. But I wanted him to know that I'm here. Like if there's a point where he wants to talk about some problem that they're having or something along the way, like I would gladly, pick up the phone and talk through it and be available for that. So I just wanted him to know that. They hired good people, like the people, we had some amazing talent at the Pros Closet, some people that were like, that were like really, really good. And when I see them, they're like their Instagram feeds or different newsletters and stuff that I get, I see that those people are still around the table. So I think there's some good people. I think the one thing that they need to do is bring a cycling mind, to the head of the company, somebody that understands the customer. I think without that, it's always going to be kind of chasing, it's going to be inefficient. And someone that's on the floor, like I said, the Gimba, like, understands the business and the process, someone that's in the office every single day. One of the things that COVID did bring is all of a sudden this like work from home, I guess, is the new norm for a lot of people. And I was thankful in the early days, everybody was there. We had stand-up meetings every morning. We were a team, like we understood what was happening in all of the departments. I think that's super important, is for everyone to be there. And especially in a startup environment where you're small again, like you just have to be quick and be agile, and people wear a lot of hats. Sometimes you might be in marketing, but sometimes you got to pack orders and help people ship stuff out. And it's just that, wear all hats mentality, I think, is really important if the business is going to be successful in the next chapter.
As I mentioned previously, Justin has been at the Pros Closet from nearly the beginning and has seen it the entire way through, including version 2.0.
Luckily, we have a new owner who came along and bought all of the digital representation of TPC. Yasser Elsher is his name. And he reached out to myself and JP Gage, who is kind of my, I don't know, the two of us are essentially restarting TPC. He's been a part of TPC for 12 years. And of course, we've already hired back a bunch of different people, but Yasser reached out to the two of us and said, hey, do you want to give this another go? And, JP and I were already in the phase of contemplating what our next career move was going to be. And when that popped up as an opportunity, we said, let's do it. We're in, largely because we knew the business is viable. We knew we had the experience and the connections to be able to rebuild the business. And we knew that we could, hopefully, knock on wood, avoid some of the pitfalls that the first TPC version fell into.
That's fantastic for you and the company to live on. Aside from investment, what are some of the pitfalls that you can identify that you would try to avoid this time?
I think we fell in love with building selection too much over moving through inventory at a regular cadence, focusing on turns. We, I think, had a thesis a couple years ago that we needed to have a bike potentially for anybody who comes to our site. So regardless of whether you're looking for a $1,500 extra small gravel bike or you're looking for an $8,000 large full suspension 130 to 140 travel, mountain bike, there was a thesis that we needed coverage, we needed selection to cover every customer who was coming through our door. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. The problem is you end up falling in love with your inventory and you hold on to it for too long. And when there are, just the standard kind of depreciation that happens with bikes, or there's moments like the pandemic when resale values can change drastically in a relatively short period, it set the old business up to not be able to pivot quickly enough. Whereas today we're focusing more on turning inventory and making sure that our bikes are competitively priced. We're getting them through our refurbishment process. We put every bike comes through, gets a full inspection and a full refurbishment process. We determine if it needs new tires, new brake pads, new cables, whatever it may be. We're putting that work into the bike and getting it listed on the site and hopefully sold within a reasonable amount of time. I think that's one of the kind of key changes that we're fundamentally focused on this time around. And then I think, some other aspects that we've actually brought back consignment, in tandem with making a cash offer to customers who are selling us their bike. We're also making a consignment offer. That might take a little bit longer for it to sell, but ultimately the consignment model is going to, net a seller the highest price for their bike in the end. So we've layered that back in, and we're already seeing over 30% of our submissions coming in the door are being accepted with consignment. So there's demand for people who are interested in the consignment model. And then we're also literally just today we've launched a loyalty program. Essentially, you can earn points when you sell or buy from the pros closet or refer customers. You can earn points that are available to spend in the long term with TPC. So we're doing some small changes here and there, but I think largely more than anything, we're just making sure that we're on top of our inventory at all times and not being stuck with bikes that we maybe overvalued or are sitting in our warehouse for too long.
I look forward to seeing how it shakes out. I'm bummed I'm not going to be at the table per se to be like, whoever wins the pre-owned space, or maybe it'll be multiple companies, or how that plays out. But to be able to unlock the value in all of that inventory to support the customer and the customer experience, whether you go and buy a new car, it's very normal for you to trade up your old car and extract the value in something that already exists and have that whole engine work seamlessly. I think our industry would really, really benefit from, and I look forward to seeing how that plays out in our space because I believe in it, and I think there's a ton of value there. And like what all the bikes, I think going back to how is TPC 2.0 going to be successful? I think one of the things that made us really successful in the early days was that we sold components, used components specifically. So if we get a bike and we couldn't service that bike, there was still 30 parts on that bike that we could sell and support, other customers that needed that part and throughout the world. And easier to ship a rear derailleur, internationally than it is to ship a bike. So I think being able to be a used component supplier, maybe it's certified pre-owned parts, not just bikes. It's there's a lot of value and a business to be had there too. So I just see, there's value in everything that exists around us, and instead of just leaving it sit on a shelf, extract that value and put it to good use and extend the life cycle of things that already exist. I wish them the best, and I hope that they, TPC 2.0 is successful, because that would feel good to be able to see that. And yeah, who knows how the used space is going to play out. It's a tough time in the industry when new bikes are essentially worth, half the price that they used to be. It just drives down the value, and it's hard for a used model like ours, where it's a certification process, is so labor intensive to be profitable when there's not a lot of meat left on the bone to be able to do that. So I think it'll be a tough road at the beginning if they continue with the same model.
That's the story of the Pros Closet, a company that left a complex legacy in the cycling industry with significant money both gained and lost along the way. Many people I spoke to who were impacted during the company's trajectory remained bound by non-disclosure agreements and were unable to share their perspectives. While we've had to rely primarily on Nick Martin's account and conversations with others close to the story, including Pete Lapinto and Justin Englands, it suggests that this narrative largely aligns with their understanding of events and speak to Nick's good intentions throughout the company's journey. Like many startup stories, the full picture contains nuances that will never be fully public. The success of the Pros Closet 2.0 remains to be seen, but it's something we'll be keenly watching and wish them all the best. I'm Wade Wallace, and you're listening to Overnight Success from Escape Collective. The music was composed by Ashley Deneve and was produced by Red Bricks Media. Thank you for listening.